regards to a student organization, because in many respects, KSU Men is a pretty remote part of the men's rights movement. It's pretty disconnected from a lot of the other activities going on, since we're kind of a constellation of different activities. But it was only with the Voice for Men's help that we actually got a huge outreach, the media connections and things like that, and I really do believe. And what made this so, just what touched me so much is I know that Paul wouldn't do this for just anybody. And his generosity has been remarkable, as well as the generosity of the AVFM staff. And I want to, again, just a preemptive round of applause for all the support that the entire staff has been offering, please. And I didn't want to come off at the risk I'm kissing too much ass here. But what Paul Elam is going to be talking about, the hysteria regarding the concept of rape culture. And he's going to be giving us an idea about how to discern between the realities of a crime versus the packaging of a concept for the benefit of a select few who want to profit from an ideological view of crime and masculinity. So please welcome Paul Elam, the founder of A Voice for Men.
Thank you, brother.
Water down here for you, too.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you. First of all, I would like to congratulate the Kennesaw State University Fire Prevention Program for not a single alarm all evening. So hats off. That's wonderful. I also want to thank the Kennesaw State University administration and faculty for allowing this conference to happen, at least those of you who didn't engage in a contemptuous campaign to slur Sage Gerard. Sage went through a lot to put this thing on and was demonized and vilified. And every day leading up to this event establishes exactly why we need to be here. And I'm really glad to be here. Somebody's going to have to show me how to work this. Okay, before I get started tonight, just one more thing I want to add, that there has been some questioning tonight about what does the men's movement do? I mean, other than bitch about feminists. And bitching about feminism is fun. The thing is, as I just pointed out with Sage, talking about these issues is an act of revolution in this culture. Simply standing up and speaking to this is activism. Don't ever be fooled to think otherwise. Too many have paid the price for doing it. Okay, let's talk about rape culture. Let's see what we got here. It is a concept that examines a culture in which rape is pervasive and normalized due to societal attitudes about gender and sexuality. Show of hands, who supports rape? Who thinks rape is normal? Come on. Nobody? Who associates with somebody personally that supports rape? How can this be a cultural phenomenon? How can we have a culture that supports rape when not even one person in this room raised their hand? Where did we get this idea that we live in a rape culture? Well, it's a complicated question with a lot of answers, but let's start with the 1 in 4 statistic. I love that one. And I'm going to be doing some reading here and switching back and forth, so you have to bear with me a little bit as we go along. But there's a theory about how rape culture emerged. Heather McDonald, an opinion writer, speculated that during the 1980s, feminist researchers committed to the rape culture theory had discovered that asking women directly if they had been raped yielded disappointing results. Very few women said they had been. So Ms. Magazine commissioned University of Arizona public health professor Mary Koss to develop a different way of measuring the prevalence of rape. Rather than asking female students about rape per se, Koss asked them if they had experienced actions that she then classified as rape. Koss's method produced the 25% rate, which Ms. then published. Some interesting points on Koss's research, in particular key questions in the survey. The last three questions were the ones that qualified as actual rape. It was 10-question survey, questions 8, 9, and 10. Number 8, have you had sexual intercourse when you didn't want to because a man gave you alcohol or drugs? Anybody want to think about that one for a minute? Have you had sexual intercourse when you didn't want to because a man threatened or used some degree of physical force, twisting your arm, holding you down to make you? And number 10, have you had sexual acts, anal or oral intercourse or penetration by objects other than a penis when you didn't want to because you were threatened? That 27.5% of those who answered yes to any of these questions, any of those three questions, is where the 1 in 4 number comes from. However, Koss herself admitted in 1992 that her question relating to sex after consuming alcohol was misleading, and that if omitted, the study actual number was reduced to 1 in 9. But we also need to consider the fact of Koss's alleged rape victims, only 25% of which stated they had been raped. If you consider the victims at their word, that drops Koss's number to 1 in 33. This is not even considering the fact that affirmative answers to Koss's first question, have you ever given into sex play, fondling, kissing, or petting, but not intercourse when you didn't want to because you were overwhelmed by a man's continual arguments and pressure, also counted as sexual victims. Perhaps it was Koss's questionable methodology, the ideological and financial motivations behind it, and a good long look at the actual rape statistics prompted McDonald to conclude, it's a lonely job working the phones at a college rape crisis center. Day after day, you wait for the casualties to show up from alleged campus rape epidemic, but no one calls. Could this mean that the crisis is overblown? No. It means, according to the rape campus sexual assault industry, that the abuse of co-eds is worse than anyone imagined. It means that consultants and counselors need more funding to persuade student rape victims to break the silence of their suffering. What does McDonald mean by the sexual assault industry? On April 4th, 2011, Assistant Secretary for Civil Rights Ruslan Ali, head of the Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights, the OCR, distributed a 19-page Dear Colleague letter to provide recipients with information to assist them in meeting their obligations. At the cost of losing federal funding on which all major institutions of higher education have grown dependent, colleges and universities are obliged under Title IX of the Civil Rights Act, which prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex, to thoroughly investigate all allegations of sexual harassment and sexual assault on campus, including the felony rape. They are also obliged, according to Ms. Hawley, to curtail due process rights of the accused. OCR's new interpretation of Title IX strongly discourages universities from permitting the accused to question or cross-examine the accuser during the hearing. In addition, if universities provide an appeals process, it must be available to both parties, which subjects the accused to double jeopardy. Most egregiously, OCR requires universities to render judgment using a preponderance of the evidence standard. That means in a rape case, a campus disciplinary board of faculty, administrators, and perhaps students serves both as judge and jury. Few, if any, of these judges are likely to have professional competence in fact gathering, evidence analysis, or judicial procedure. Yet to deliver a verdict of guilty, they need only believe that the accused is more likely than not to have committed the crime. Let's pretend for a moment that this imperfect as it is all for the best in the name of protecting rape victims. Let's pretend that this kind of messaging, thank you. Let's pretend that this kind of messaging, targeting all men with the message that they need to be shamed out of raping women while pretending that telling actual rapists not to rape will actually stop them. Let's pretend that men everywhere need to be told that this is not an invitation to help themselves. Let us even pretend that this is a noble effort by young women to stop a culture of victim blaming rather than just being a parade of attention-seeking personality disorders. So why really is all this a problem? I want to introduce you to Caleb Warner, a University of North Dakota student. Caleb Warner met a girl at a frat party. They had drinks. They eventually had sex. He went on holiday for a few days and came back. Afterwards, he was pulled out of class by an administrator and told that he had been charged with rape. He was found guilty. He was kicked out of school. His education was in ruins. His reputation was in ruins. The woman eventually also filed a police report about the rape. The police investigated. Not only did they find no merit in it, they found that she was lying and issued a warrant for her arrest for making a false police statement. She fled the state to avoid prosecution, and the University of North Dakota said, "We don't care. You're still out." It took him years and a lot of money to finally get his name cleared. The university finally lifted the ban on him. He is not, however, returning to school. He's doing deliveries in Fargo, I believe, and says he can't even drive by the university anymore. Why is this a problem? Indeed. Next, we have the story, and I'm sure some of you will be familiar with it, of Judith Grossman. She is a card-carrying, or was a card-carrying feminist. Her son texted her one day and said, "Call me in a hurry, it's really important." A former girlfriend, somebody he hadn't seen in years, had accused him of sexual assault. Luckily for him, Judith Grossman is an attorney, and she worked real hard and finally got him cleared and got the charges dropped. And she wrote an editorial piece for the Wall Street Journal lamenting, how could this have happened? How could any of this be happening? And she asked, who knew that American college students are required to surrender the Bill of Rights at the campus gates? We knew. Those of us in this room have known for years. The answer to Grossman's question is the men and women of the men's human rights movement, and for quite some time. And we have been talking about it, and it also appears that others are learning. RAINN, the nation's largest anti-sexual assault organization, one of America's top 100 best charities according to Worth magazine, has urged the White House to form a task force to overhaul colleges' treatment of rape. After the White House requested feedback on the problem of campus sexual assaults, RAINN urged the White House to abandon the notion of rape culture, and I quote, "In the last few years, there has been an unfortunate trend towards blaming rape culture for the extensive problem of sexual violence on campuses. While it is helpful to point out the systemic barriers to addressing the problem, it is important not to lose sight of a simple fact. Rape is caused not by cultural factors, but by conscious decisions of a small percentage of the community to commit a violent crime. That was put in a letter to the task force from Marines President Scott Berkowitz and Vice President for Public Policy Rebecca O'Connor. No reply from the White House so far. So, what is rape? It's a crime. It's a vicious crime, whether it's committed against a man or a woman or a child. And it is a crime that is committed against men, women, and children. There could be a whole different talk on that subject alone. But what is rape culture? Rape culture is a product, and it's being peddled on university campuses like crack, and it's being bought over and over and over again. It is a myth. It does not exist. It is no more real than a patriarchy that abuses and takes advantages of women for the sole pleasure of men. We need to talk about this stuff, but talking about it really is a lot more difficult than it seems. Dr. Fiamingo mentioned Warren Farrell's lecture at the University of Toronto. Steve Brule, who's filming here tonight, filmed part of that. And if you've watched that video, you saw as a young man was spittle flying rage at him for daring to want to walk in the door and to hear about what was happening to boys and men. And Steve interviewed him a few minutes after that moment, and it turned out that this young man had had two friends kill themselves in very short order, just one right after the other. And he was looking for closure on why he lost two friends. And he was spat at and called rape apologist, incest apologist, abuser, woman hater, misogynist, every name in the book, simply for wanting to walk into a door. If somebody wants to know why we have issues with negotiating with feminists, does that not explain it? Erin Pitsey, one of our editors at large, is the woman who started the battered women's shelter movement in Cheswick, England in 1971. Erin, on a shoestring budget, on basically handouts, started a shelter for women to give them a place to go, and she began the study of these abused women. And she found, after years of looking at the problem, that many of the women in her shelter were as abusive or more abusive than the men they were apparently running from. When she published that and she went public with it, she was stalked, she was harassed by members of a domestic violence industry that had seen a cash cow in domestic violence, and Erin Pitsey was in the way. They shot her dog. She had the bomb squad at her home and eventually felt so unsafe that she moved to the United States. This is the feminism we're dealing with, not the one in the dictionary. During our last conference, a Voice for Men conference, we had a great time there after the death threats, after we had to move venue, after we had to have an emergency fundraiser for police protection because people were threatening us. And it's really funny, they had a great big, well, not great big, they made it bigger than it was. They had a protest in downtown Detroit, and I remember a photograph from that, and feminists were carrying a banner down the street, stretched wide all the way across the street, and it said, "Feminism is for everyone." And I wondered, is that an invitation to belong or a command to submit Well, folks, I want to thank everybody for coming here. I want to thank you, Sage, for allowing me the privilege of speaking here. And I just want to end this by asking you to consider a couple of things. People have been asking, what are the answers to these problems? Well, what would it be like if 5 years from now there were 10 or 15 of these meetings going on university campuses in the fall semester? What would it mean if there were 30 or 40 of these meetings going on college campuses in the fall semester? We can do this. This room right here is proof that we can change the dialogue. We've had a lot of questions about what to do, what we need to do, what A Voice for Men is trying to do, what KSUM is trying to do, what all these good people associated are trying to do is simply change the dialogue, change the nature of the talk. All this whole paradigm about women as victims and men as perpetrators, and instead build bridges between men and women based on human dignity. That is a connection that can happen if we allow it. Right now, there are millions and millions of grandmothers who can't see their grandchildren because of a corrupt family court. There are millions of second wives out there who live at or below poverty because the first wife is draining the husband through the courts. We need to encourage these women to speak up. This is why we have always invited women into the fold at A Voice for Men, is because without a unified voice, we will have what we've had for the last 100 years, which is nothing. We've got something now. Let's move on with it. Thank you.